Hey guys, welcome to our next video on the Vietnam War. Today we're going to focus on what that war looked like under our next president that we are going to study, President Richard Nixon. So let's start by writing that essential question here in the top of the box, which is how does Americans at home impact the war in Vietnam? So quick refresher, the Vietnam War is a very controversial war, lasts many years. And it's between North and South Vietnam, North pictured here in red, and South here in green. And the United States supports South Vietnam during this conflict. So Richard Nixon is our next president. Remember, we left off when President LBJ, or Lyndon Johnson, the Democrat, knows Vietnam War is becoming a problem. People are not happy with how it's going. It's becoming a much more serious situation, and he knows he cannot win if he were to run for re-election. It takes down his presidency, and so our next president is a Republican, Nixon, and he's going to continue that war in Vietnam. Two groups of people emerged during this time. We call them hawks or doves. So hawks are people that support the war, think that we should be in Vietnam and helping the South Vietnamese government. And there are doves who are proponents of peace, and they want the United States to get out of this conflict. At this time, we see the anti-war movement grow, and I'm going to highlight that. It's kind of a big part answering our essential question. We see the movement against the war in Vietnam become more popular as protesters feel that there's really no business for us to be there. And we have events like the Tet Offensive, which we discussed in our notes last time, which was this big turning point where Americans really saw that South Vietnam and our U.S. troops were losing this war. It's not going our way. Another key thing here is that television, becomes very important here. This is the first time a war is televised. This is the first time that people come home from work, they turn on the evening news, and they're able to see firsthand what is really going on from their living room. And so some of the problems that Americans are seeing, some of the horrors of the Vietnam War, include things like napalm, which means liquid fire. A napalm is a chemical weapon that the United States would drop on Vietnam, and if you were hit with napalm, just kind of like it sounds like liquid fire, it burns. And so you see these look like children, young people running from this napalm in the back because this is burning their skin and their clothing. Agent Orange is another huge chemical that we dropped. Instead of on people, we dropped this one on the environment. We dropped this on trees. Because if you remember from our photographs that we looked at the start of class last time, Vietnam is a dense jungle, and there's lots of natural tree cover that the Viet Cong, or opponents, were using to their advantage. And so we realized, hey, if we burn their trees, if we get rid of all of this foliage, they won't have that tree cover, they won't have that advantage anymore. So a very interesting military strategy. The result is pretty serious health problems occurred for people who ingested those chemicals. That stuff lasts in the air, and it caused cancer, it caused deformities in children, pretty serious stuff. The My Lai massacre, I'm not going to go into this too much because it was in our Choose Your Own Adventure book. This was the event that started to shift public opinion. This is when U.S. troops approached a village which they thought were full of rebel fighters. Turns out the Viet Cong were not there, and for whatever reason, those American soldiers decided to murder pretty much everybody in that village. Only a few people escaped. It was a pretty horrific act of violence, and it was covered up by the military for about a year until it got out. And when people at home heard about it, it really changed the opinion, because we're supposed to be the good guys. We're supposed to be people that treat others fairly, and this was an example of pretty gross injustice. against totally unarmed civilians. And we see students start to stand up and to protest. We see college students get really active in the anti-war movement. And there's a question up here on the left-hand side of your notes. Why do you think college students get involved in this? Make sure that you give that one an answer before you turn in these notes. But something to get you thinking is down below here, my bad, this photograph here is from Kent State. And again, we had this in our Choose Your Own Adventure book, but if you chose the college route, you learned about the shooting at Kent State, where unarmed college students were gunned down by the National Guard while protesting the Vietnam War, and 4 students were killed and 9 others were injured that day. Tinker versus Des Moines is also a key Supreme Court case. This one comes up on STAR a lot, so I'm gonna highlight this one here. Tinker versus Des Moines is a court case where let's not do that whole thing. Here we go. Awesome. So these students decided, hey, they were going to wear these black armbands. Now, these aren't college students. These are high school students. They decided they were going to wear these black armbands with the peace sign as a way of protesting the Vietnam War. The school told them, take off the armbands or you're suspended. They refused, and the school suspended the students. And they took their case all the way to the Supreme Court, who eventually agreed with them and said, hey, this is students' rights. The student right to protest. They're not being disruptive, and they should be allowed to wear those armbands. And so that was a pretty big moment in the student protest part of Vietnam. I want to show you one video just to wrap up the protest section. This is going to be a veteran speaking. This is obviously this person's experience and opinion, but I think it really shows you how strongly people are starting to feel about Vietnam and that maybe we shouldn't be there at all.
William H. Carroll. Highest medal in the country. It doesn't mean anything. Bob Neal died for these medals. Lieutenant Conwell died so I got a medal. Sergeant John died so I got a medal. I got a Silver Star, Purple Heart, Army Commendation Medal, 8 air medals, National Defense, and the rest of it's garbage. It doesn't mean a thing.
It's a short video, but it's pretty powerful. You have a young man standing there shouting about how he has all of these medals because all of the terrible things he has seen, all the friends he has that have died, and it doesn't mean anything to him, and he throws them away. And so we're starting to get to the end of the war now. So keep in mind there's a couple of vocabulary words on the left. You can fill those in with some drawings when you get a moment. But just to wrap up our notes today, a couple key things. As we're ending the war, Nixon's plan to end the war is called Vietnamization. That's our vocab term. All it means is, Nixon's starting to see that this is not a war we can sustain. We got to get out. And he pursues peace with honor. That's what he calls his plan to exit the war with a little bit of dignity. A couple key things that happen right as the war is ending. The Pentagon Papers. I'm going to highlight this one. This is a super big one. If those of y'all interested in whistleblowers and things that are going on right now, you'll see this is kind of the original whistleblower. This is a guy, Daniel Ellsberg, leaks a bunch of documents towards the end of the war, showing that our government had actually been interfering with Vietnam for years and had hid it from the public, kind of hid the intent, where our politicians had said, like, yeah, we want to get out of Vietnam in the next, 6 months, and then 6 months go by, and hey, we're still there. And, these types of things have been happening for quite some time. And this only outrages people more, right? Americans don't like to hear when our government is lying to us. And so that, in addition to the fall of Saigon, the capital in South Vietnam, it is captured, it falls, and that is pretty much it for the war. Public opinion, right, helps shift some things. We don't like hearing that our government has not been honest. We lose Saigon. this war is over. It continues in Vietnam, but our involvement is done. The opinion has shifted, and we got to get out. So the legacy of Vietnam, pretty complex, pretty unfortunate one. Lots of death and destruction on both sides. Both U.S. soldiers and innocent people in Vietnam, right, lose their life in this conflict. We see that there is some incredible power of the public. All the protests, all of the anti-war activism really helps change the action in the war. It starts to get us out. It starts to shift public opinion. We see media and television is able to create some of that shift as well. These people are watching this from their couch and can't really avoid it any longer. It's in your own living room. And finally, we do pass a bill called the War Powers Act, and that limits our presidential power in future military conflicts. This is a piece of legislation or law that's passed to try to make it a little harder for our politicians to wage war, right, without permission from Congress. And so I know that was a lot of information, guys. Thank you so much for sticking with me. We only have a couple days to cover this war. It is much more complicated than this. There are tons of awesome documentaries on Netflix if you're interested. There's some pretty good ones. Come see me for suggestions. But go ahead and give yourself a little summary of these notes. What did you learn today? Jot down 2 to 3 sentences. Make sure you have answered the questions and boxes on the left. You're going to turn this page over, jump into the next activity.